Here's a thought that many people find intuitive. The Torah has a vast plan of responsibilities, mitzvos, which Kadosh Baruch Hu has commanded. What is my responsibility? Is my responsibility to do what he commanded? Or is my responsibility to try my best to do what he commanded? Of course, Kadosh Baruch Hu didn't say, try your best to put on tefillin, try your best to give charity, try your best to bench after meals. He didn't say that. He said, put on tefillin, give charity, bench after meals. But maybe that's what it really means, or maybe that's how we have to interpret it. Because after all, what can you ask from me more than that I should try my best? Once I've tried my best, there's nothing more I can do. Certainly, you're not going to ask me to do something that's impossible for me to do. Certainly, you wouldn't hold me responsible for failing to do something which I couldn't do. If somebody wants to criticize me, accuse me of a failing, and he says, you did A, why didn't you do B? Isn't it usually a sufficient explanation that I couldn't have done B? Doesn't he withdraw his question then? So it seems intuitive that really all that can be asked is that you should try your best. And since that's all that could be asked reasonably, that must be what HaKadosh Baruch Hu meant. When he said to do these things, what he really meant was, try your best to do these things. And there was, in fact, a famous philosopher named Immanuel Kant who said so as part of his moral philosophy. His slogan was, ought implies can. To say that someone ought to do something implies that he can do it. If you discover that he can't do it, you have to withdraw your claim, your assertion that he ought to have done it. You have to withdraw that. It's not true that he ought to have done it. Oughts go only as far as your capabilities, no further than that. That's just an official way of putting the thought that your responsibility is really only to try your best. But as a matter of fact, that's not the only way to account for our intuition, by saying that your real responsibility is only to try your best. Because the intuition that we're dealing with here is a little bit fuzzy, a little bit murky, and it's not 100% clear and well-defined. Because here's another way to handle the same feeling, to handle the same set of ideas. Let's not talk about what you have a responsibility to do, what your obligation is, what you ought to do. Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about how do we deal with failure. Someone doesn't succeed in satisfying the law, the rule, the commandment. How should we treat such a person? How should we look at such a person? In particular, is such a person, is it appropriate to criticize such a person, to penalize such a person, or not? Here, I think we could express the same intuition, the same feeling as we had before. Let's say the rule is, appear before the judge every Thursday morning between 9 and 10. So every Thursday morning, there I am at 9:30, 9:15, 9:45. Except 3 months ago, on Wednesday, I broke my leg. And the doctor said, don't walk on that leg for a week. So Thursday, I missed it. I did not fulfill the king's order. What penalty should be applied to me for not fulfilling the king's order? Here we say, none at all. He couldn't have come. I couldn't have come. Even the doctor told me, don't walk on your leg. So if you look at it post facto and ask, what should be the consequences of failure? I call it failure because the king said, be there between 9 and 10, and I wasn't there between 9 and 10, so I didn't do what I was told to do. There certainly shouldn't be any negative consequences. I couldn't have done it is certainly a defense against criticism and penalty. It's not right to criticize a person or penalize him for failing to live up to a rule when he couldn't live up to the rule. That I think we could all agree upon. Now the question is there more than that in addition, or maybe that's enough? Maybe that's enough to show why a person who can't do it is special and why he's protected in a certain way, and that's all you have to say. So when it comes back to the question of what we call in Hebrew lechatchila, before the event takes place, what are my responsibilities? It could be, you say, your responsibility is to do what you were told. And if you fail to do what you were told, then you failed to do what you were responsible to do. It's just that if you weren't able to do what you were responsible to do, then no penalty. No criticism and no penalty, no rebuke, no punishment, because you couldn't have done it. You couldn't have satisfied it. Maybe this idea that a person is what he's being asked to do goes beyond his capabilities, just protects him from the negative consequences of failure, but doesn't deprive him of the responsibility at the outset. Maybe he really still is responsible, and when he fails, he's protected from penalty. So now we have two ways of looking at it. Kant's way, which is more radical, there's no responsibility. There's nothing to do. There can't be any failure if there's no responsibility at all. You're only responsible to try your hardest. And if you know, if you try your hardest, you certainly have done what you need to do. And if you know that trying your hardest won't succeed, then there's no point even in trying your hardest because you won't succeed. Indeed, there's something a little unhinged about someone who has, I know I can't do it, but I'm trying my best to do it. I don't think that's a possible sane state of mind. You don't try to do things which you know you can't do. You try if you don't know. Maybe I will succeed, maybe I won't. And if you don't succeed and you discover that you're incapable of doing it, then you say, okay, I was incapable. It's not my fault. Well, one way you can ask which view is right is by and this is you applying the scientific method to philosophy, and ask, and this is what the Gemara does all the time, what is the difference between the two views? What practical difference would it make? In what kind of situation would these two ideas give you different outcomes? So let's imagine, I'll give you an example. George borrows money in January, $100,000. He owns a home, he owns a car, he has a job, he has money in the bank. He's 42 years old, been working for 20 years, has a good record. The bank says, fine. A year's loan. And a year from now, January 13th, pay back the $100,000. He signs all the papers, he gets the money. Over the next 8 months, things start to go bad. His home burns down, his car is stolen, and he gets sick, so he can't work, and some of his relatives need his help, so he's required to spend some time in helping them. Comes around to January 12th next year, he hasn't got the money. There's no way he can have the money by tomorrow. So tomorrow comes, and he doesn't pay. Has anything gone wrong? Well, according to Kant, he has no responsibility to pay. Because he can't do it, because it's impossible for him, he has no responsibility. We can't say to him, you ought to pay $100,000, because ought implies can. In his case, the can is incorrect. So it seems to me, Kant has to regard this world as a perfectly good world. Nothing's gone wrong. Everybody has lived up to all his responsibilities. That's a great record. I think intuitively, we don't feel that that's right. He borrowed the money and didn't pay it back. According to Kant, he has no obligation to pay it back. So what do I care that he borrowed it and didn't pay it back? What I care about is, do people live up to the obligations that they have? If everybody has lived up to all of his obligations, seems to me like you're living in a pretty ideal world. And that seems to be the wrong outcome. According to the other point of view, something's wrong. He has an obligation to pay $100,000, and he's not paying it. So he's failed to live up to that obligation. That's bad. What should we do about it being bad? Should we criticize him and penalize him? No. No, that's not the right response. Because he couldn't have paid it. But that doesn't mean that nothing's gone wrong. What's going wrong is he has an obligation to pay $100,000. He's not doing it. And in practical terms, I'll show you the difference from the point of view of a bystander. Let's take Peter. Peter happens to be a multimillionaire. Peter has millions of dollars in cash in the bank. Should Peter lend $100,000? What was the name of the guy that I was talking about? Also Peter? Make a mistake? Oh, it was Peter. Let's say George. George is multimillionaire. He has millions of dollars in the bank. Should George lend Peter $100,000 to pay his debt? Would that make the world a better place? Would that improve the world in any way? Is there any moral motivation for George to give Peter the means to pay off the debt? Of course, the minute George gives Peter the money, then he'll be obligated. And then when he's obligated, he'll use George's money to fulfill the obligation. Should he do that or shouldn't he do that? Seems to me, according to Kant, there's no motivation whatsoever for George to give money to Peter. Because if George doesn't give money to Peter, Peter has no obligation. You don't make the world a better place by creating obligations for people, even if they fulfill them. The world isn't a better place because there are more obligations, more things that need to be done. So if you have the Kantian picture, there's no reason whatsoever for George to provide Peter with the money to pay off his loan. But if you have the second picture, Peter has failed to fulfill his obligation. He has a debt and he hasn't paid it. When George gives Peter the money, or lends, he can even lend him the money, then Peter can fulfill the outstanding obligation that he has to pay off the loan. Well, a world in which a person has an obligation and fails to meet it is a world in which there's a moral failing. If you can change it so that the person can meet his obligation, you've made the world into a better place. So it seems to me that a practical difference between the two views is whether one person should help another person fulfill his responsibilities. Well, that puts it in a prejudicial way. a responsibility which, if he had the means, he should do, and right now he can't do. Is there any reason to give the person the means to fulfill that responsibility? According to Kant, I think the answer is no, and according to the other view, the answer is yes. And intuition is a funny thing, and it's individual. People have different intuitions about things, but I think that the second view preserves this feeling that, yeah, but he didn't pay his loan. Okay, he hasn't got any money, and he can't get any money. But the world isn't a perfectly good place because he borrowed money, didn't pay it back. According to Kant, it's very difficult to give any expression to that feeling. Now, if you take a look at Jewish sources are squarely on the side of the second view. Let's suppose it's Sukkot, and Reuven bought a lulav and esrog, and he has them, and he's waiting to use them to do the mitzvah, and then something happens. One of his children pokes a hole in the esrog, or a stone falls on the lulav and breaks it, and now he has no lulav and esrog. No fault of his own. No fault of his own. He spent the money, and he bought them, and so on and so on, and now he doesn't have. As he stands, he can't fulfill the mitzvah of lulav and esrog. But I have lulav and esrog. Should I lend my lulav and esrog to Reuven so that he can do the mitzvah? According to Kant, absolutely not. I mean, you can if you want, but certainly no reason to, because he hasn't got any mitzvah to do it. He hasn't got any obligation to do it. Well, the Torah doesn't agree. I do have a mitzvah to help him do his mitzvahs, the basis for which I'll explain in a moment. That being the case, I do have a responsibility for his mitzvahs, and the fact that in his present condition it's impossible for him to do the mitzvah doesn't relieve him of the responsibility to do the mitzvah. And then when I lend him my lulav and esrog, give him and get it back, and so forth and so on. Well, on the first day, second day. When I do that, I'm enabling him to fulfill his mitzvah, and the world is a better place. Because otherwise, he had a mitzvah to do, and he didn't do the mitzvah. The world has that lack in it. So this means that really what we are responsible to do is to do all of the mitzvahs. We are responsible to live perfect lives. That's what our responsibility is. It's not just to do our best. And a person who does his best and it doesn't come out to be perfect has failed to fulfill his responsibilities. It's just that since it's impossible for him to do more, he doesn't deserve any negative consequences for his failure, but a failure it is. As we said, the nafkamina will be with somebody should help him fulfill his mitzvahs, his responsibilities. There's another difference between the two views. Let's imagine it's a case like this. A is trying to kill B. A is a murderer, and he's trying to kill B. And Reuven sees this. A is loading his gun. B is tied up. And A is going to shoot a bullet into B and kill him. And A says, I got to stop this. This is terrible. This is cold-blooded murder. The only means that I have for stopping it is to throw a stone at A. My baseball arm is pretty good. If I hit him in the right place, I'll stop him. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to do it. He picks up a stone, takes aim, and he throws, and he misses. And A shoots B and kills him. Later comes to light what happened. B's relatives say to A, we know you tried, and we're sure you tried your best, and we appreciate your effort. Reuven might say, you're right, I did try my best. I'm very sorry that my best wasn't good enough. What does it mean, I'm very sorry that my best wasn't good enough? What is he apologizing for? Now, when we say I'm sorry, that phrase has a lot of different meanings. For example, if someone loses his watch and tells me the story of losing his watch, I could say, I'm so sorry to hear that. We do talk that way. Surely there, I'm not taking any responsibility for the loss. I had nothing to do with it. I'm just expressing the fact that I share his pain. But here I don't think it's just that. Ruvain says, I'm sorry, my best wasn't good enough to stop the murder. It seems to me that Ruvain feels, I threw and I missed. I was the only one who could have stopped it, and I missed. He feels inadequate in some way. The fact that he couldn't have done any better doesn't prevent him from feeling inadequate. Why does he feel inadequate? What does that inadequacy, that feeling inadequacy, reflect? It reflects the fact that he didn't live up to his obligation. He didn't live up to his obligation. I'll give you another example. This example was created originally for a different purpose and has other elements in it, but it shows you how wide the net is, how the wide variety of cases to which this applies. There are people who will tell you that ethics is nothing just when you say something's right or wrong, good or evil, just or unjust, you're just venting your feelings. You're just saying, I like it and I don't like it. That's all. Recommending that other people should like it the way you like it, or dislike it the way you should dislike it. That's all it is. There's nothing special to ethics. It's just a question of positive and negative feelings. So I want you to think about two cases where a person makes a decision, and in both cases, afterwards, when he reconsiders it, he feels he made the wrong decision. And he regrets making the wrong decision. And tell me whether you think that the regret will be the same in the two cases. First case is this. This person likes hockey games and he likes basketball games. Likes both of them. He looks up in the papers of sports. Turns out on the same night in his town, there's going to be a hockey game and a basketball game. Can't go to both. Which one should he go to? So he starts thinking, how long has it been since I've been to a hockey game? And how long has it been to a basketball game? And what are the features of the game that I like? I really like it in the hockey game when they hit each other with the sticks. That doesn't happen in basketball. Under the basket, when you're going for the rebound, elbows fly into the other guy's neck and the other guy's ribs. He has his preferences and so forth and so on. This will cost more, this is further away, the better time of night. He makes his calculation and he says, I'm going to the basketball game. He goes. A week later, he thinks back, I made the wrong decision. No. Would have been better to go to the hockey game. So, he made his decision. He now regrets it. He thinks it was a mistake. He should have done the other thing. That's case number one. Now, case number two. He likes basketball. He's also promised his friend to help him with a project. It's an important project. The person has consequences. He promised him 6 weeks ago to help him on this night. It turns out on this night is a very exciting basketball game. What to do now? It's basketball versus the promise. So he weighs it up and he thinks of the consequences. He decides basketball. Going to the basketball game. And he does. A week later, he's thinking it over. Basketball game. I welched on my promise. I didn't fulfill my promise. I made a mistake. Wrong decision. I should have fulfilled my promise. So both cases so far are parallel. There was a choice. He made it freely. A week later, he regrets it and feels that he should have made the other choice. Isn't there a difference between the two cases? An important difference in the way he feels about the failure in the two cases? Won't the second case have in it guilt, I should have fulfilled my promise. Will the first case have in it guilt? I chose the basketball game. Dope! I should have chosen the hockey game. I can feel that I made a wrong choice. I'm not going to feel guilty about it. The feeling of guilt in the second case indicates that when it's a moral choice, it's not the same as something I happen to like, something I have a pro attitude towards, something I'm in favor of. I'm in favor of hockey also. I have a pro attitude towards hockey also. That's not it. Morality is special. Morality counts, and if a person felt guilty in the first case, we say there's something wrong with him. Why would you feel guilty of choosing basketball over hockey and then feeling later you made the wrong choice? Dumb you could feel, but not guilty, because you didn't do anything wrong. Whereas in the case of basketball versus the promise, you did something wrong. So it's appropriate to feel guilty. This, I think, shows that the idea that ethics is just a matter of venting your feelings and question what you prefer and what you like and what you enjoy and what you have pro attitudes towards is superficial. It doesn't account for the ways in which we feel about things. So I think that's also part of the idea of the feeling that you have when you don't live up to a responsibility. Even if you couldn't have done better, still something went wrong. And it's something about you that's wrong, that you didn't do it. Now, the right view, and the view that the Torah commends, I think has a psychological effect as well. There is a statement in the Gemara, and the Rambam quotes it: a person should regard himself as if his merits and failures are equally balanced, and the merits and failures of the world are equally balanced, so that in the next action that he performs, he'll tip the scale. And if he does a meritorious action, so then he'll tip the scale towards good. And if he does a bad action, he'll tip the scale towards bad, off the equality point. And the Rambam says if you do a bad action and you tip it over to the negative, then the world will be destroyed. That's the way a person should feel. Now, it bothered me, still bothers me. I don't think the Torah wants us to believe things that aren't true. We're not supposed to live a life of fantasy. So why would the Torah tell us to think of this idea, since the probability that I'm equally balanced and the whole world is equally balanced is indiscriminately non-different from zero? Why should you think that? And there are explanations which are psychological. Maybe you've heard about this kind of scenario. Maybe some of you have actually experienced it. You're on a football team, and at the end of the first half, you're down to the other team by 17 points. So it's halftime. And the coach is speaking to the team in the locker room and saying, listen, we're down 17 points, but we can still do it. We can still do it. If you do this and you do this and we push and we play with spirit, we could still turn the game around. Now, an experienced player will sit there and say, let's see, 17 points, 2 quarters left. The probability of that is about 0.00001%. 17 points, 2.5 touchdowns, 2 touchdowns and a field goal. But if you think this, and if you try, then you'll only lose by 5 points instead of losing by 30 points. So thinking this will have a good outcome, you'll play harder if you think you have a chance to win. So maybe entertaining an idea which, in terms of cold logic, isn't very likely to be true, might be worthwhile in a practical sense, because it'll get you to do something. Okay, I could hear that. Maybe concentrating on the truth isn't the only consideration which is important. There could be other considerations that are important also. But there's another way to look at it. Now, this way of looking at it doesn't make it literally true, so it's not doing the whole job, but it does part of the job. Let's imagine that you're collecting money for a charitable cause, and you need $100,000. Like charity, if you know what that is. The contributions are coming in, and the scale is going up, and getting closer to the top. You're up to $98,000, and someone makes a $10,000 contribution. No, they're not going to give back the $8,000. They'll keep that also. Fine. Wow! We made it! Who's the guy that gave the last $10,000? He pushed it over the top. He made it a success. Call him up. Interview him. Publicize his name. He's the one who made it a success. Is that correct? I don't think so. What about the guy that gave the first $500? Well, all right, I'm sorry, to make it right, the last guy gives $2,000. Just $2,000 gets just $100,000. I made a mistake, I'm not using that aspect of it now. Right? The last guy who gave the last $2,000 and made it up to $100,000 do more than the guy who gave the first $2,000? Not really. Because you need $100,000. If you subtract the first two, you won't have it either. He's not special. The sum total of everybody's contributions is $100,000. Everybody has an equal share, or a share, in making the $100,000. Fine. That's when you had exactly $100,000. Suppose contributions are coming in from all over, and it takes time to process them, and when they call the time and they finish processing them, you end up with $130,000. So, how did the donors feel? Should we say, well, we really didn't need that last $30,000? Maybe not, but whose is it? There's no way of tracking back when they came in because it takes time to process them and nobody keeps track of how long it takes to process them. All we know is we ended up with $130,000. Isn't it true that everyone's contribution is part of the success? Can't each person, as I said, each person who gave money, you're not responsible, you're not responsible, you're not responsible, you didn't do anything, because if you hadn't given, we would have gotten there anyway. So everybody should go home feeling as if he did nothing? That's dumb. Everybody did, and the result was a success, and there was extra. So, that being the case, even if I'm not perfectly balanced, and the world's not perfectly balanced, and even if the next action isn't going to make the difference between tipping to the good side or tipping to the bad side, let's say I'm 60% good, but each good action contributes to that 60%. Each good action is part of the sum total that makes me 60% good. So I shouldn't discount an action and say, you know, I could have left that one out because I'm 60%. If I let that one out, it would have been 59%. I also would have been good. With that logic, I shouldn't feel good about anything that I did. Because every one of them I could have left out, and I still would have been 59, 58, 57, which is better than 50%. That's not the right attitude. The right attitude it is that all the good actions that I did contribute to the 60% success. So again, I'm looking at the value of the individual action. So this is a way of looking at the significance of the action. Now, the same thing's true when a person fails to live up to an obligation and he couldn't have done any better. Yes, he doesn't deserve any penalty, but that doesn't mean that nothing's gone wrong. This is an action which contributes to the other side. It's an action which contributes to failure. It's an obligation that I had, an obligation I did not fulfill. So I think that attitude towards the action is the attitude is correct, and the psychological impact, I still feel inadequate. One impact of that will be I should work to expand my capabilities. So the next time I'll be capable of a better performance. That could go into doing your best, but it's a kind of psychological motivation, not just I was told to do my best, so I'll do my best. Absolutely. If that means preparing for next time, I hear you. I'll prepare for next time as best I can. But rather, if I don't prepare and I don't expand my capabilities and I don't do more, I'm inadequate because there's something that I had to do and I didn't do it. It's a little bit like something called supererogation. Supererogation is where you don't really have to do something, but it would be good if you did. There's some things which are voluntarily good. Take a person who fulfills all his obligations, all his duties, does everything that he's required to do, but never volunteers. Don't you feel this like something low, something degraded, something crass about a person who just fulfills exactly what he's obligated to do, never volunteers? There's a Gemara, the Tanakh, a few times has the phraseology, emes, chesed ve'emes. A person should do chesed and emes. Chesed means loving kindness, and emes means, let's say, justice, because it means a lot of things in different contexts. So the Gemara says that the Torah puts the two of them together because very often psychologically, a person who excels at the one uses that as an excuse not to live up even to the minimal demands of the other. A person says, I give extra money to charity and I volunteer to help people. And sometimes I don't bench after meals. You know, how much do you want from me? I'm doing all this extra and all that extra. And sometimes I don't bench after the meal, you know. I can allow myself that because of all the extra stuff that I'm doing. No, actually you can't. There has to be emes also. The other person says, I live up to every obligation. My taxes are computed down to the 10th of a penny, and I pay them a week early. I do everything that I'm required to do. You want voluntarism from me also? You want lifting me sure as it did also? Surely that's asking too much. Surely that's more than you can expect. The Torah wants chesed and emes. So living up to your obligations can be not enough, and the fact that you do extra is not an excuse not to live up to your obligations. Neither one is appropriate. What I'm showing you here is that there are ways of looking at what you do which affect your attitudes towards what you do. And the second view, what I'm calling the second view, where if you're unable to fulfill your obligation, you bear no penalty for that, but you do have the live fact that there was an obligation, you didn't fulfill it. That's something which will change your attitude towards what you're doing, and it will hopefully galvanize your motivation in an appropriate way. Now, I said that according to the Torah's view, we have responsibilities for each other's mitzvos. There's a very deep philosophical basis for this, which I'll just sketch out now for you briefly. I'll use an example which the Gemara uses, Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. Here's a scenario. It's Friday night, and I come home, and I make kiddush, I make hamotzi, sit down at the table, my family, my guests, and we're eating the soup. They knock on the door, open the door, there's a stranger standing there, and he says, Rabbi, I have a problem. I didn't make kiddush. I haven't heard kiddush. I've not fulfilled the mitzvah of kiddush. Please make kiddush for me. Please make kiddush for him. The way that usually works is, I do the mitzvah of kiddush, and he, by listening to me do that mitzvah, fulfills his mitzvah. That's how it usually works. But now, I've done that mitzvah. It's a once-a-week mitzvah. I did it 45 minutes ago. Come back next week, and you can join me at the beginning of the meal. But I can't do this for you now because I haven't got any mitzvah to do. I can say the words, but that's not any mitzvah. But the law is I can do it. So why can I do it? So Rashi says, because every Jew is responsible for every other Jew. Kol Yisrael Ravim Zelazah. Well, Rashi's words on the surface leave open the following question. Okay, I'm responsible for him? Don't worry, I'm not going to abandon him. I'll give him a siddur, I'll give him his own cup of wine. If he can't read the siddur, I'll say the words and he can say them after me, so he himself is saying the words of Kiddush. I'll help him make Kiddush. I'm responsible for him. I'll do for him everything that I can. It's just that legally, if he wants me to say Kiddush and he should be Yotzei, as we say, with my Kiddush, that's not available because I haven't got a mitzvah of Kiddush to do. Rashi's words, if read superficially, don't answer that question. So the Ran fills it in. And here's the point that I'm aiming for. The Ran says, as long as there is any Jew in the world who has not fulfilled the mitzvah of Kiddush, if he asks me to make Kiddush for him, my mitzvah of Kiddush returns. My own mitzvah of Kiddush returns. And then I'm doing my mitzvah. Because he hasn't fulfilled it, I have a mitzvah. The Ritva goes a step further and he says, from here you see that the Jewish people is like one organism. And therefore, I'm speaking now, let's say, for example, there's an infection in the left hand. The right hand can't say, oh, what does that bother me? I'm the right hand, the infection in the left hand. But there's one bloodstream serving the whole body. And there's an infection in the left hand, and the right hand is in danger. So it can't be indifferent to what's going on with the other hand. Here too, what the Ritva is telling us is, you can't be indifferent as to the condition of another Jew. And in particular, if he hasn't fulfilled a mitzvah, then that's going to be your mitzvah as well. Okay, here's a way to conceptualize this. How do you understand the mitzvah? Is the mitzvah make Kiddush, or is the mitzvah to act in such a way that Jews fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush? In other words, is the mitzvah inherently social, maybe? It's not a mitzvah for you to do your mitzvah for yourself. You have a responsibility for the mitzvah of the group, of the nation. And then, when somebody comes in the door and says, I haven't fulfilled the mitzvah, of course it's your mitzvah. Because the mitzvah in the beginning was act on behalf of the mitzvah of Klal Yisrael to make Kiddush. The social nature of the mitzvah is built into the mitzvah. And on this, I think it's very indicative. This idea that Kol Yisrael Ravim Zelazah, all Jews are responsible for one another, isn't one of the 613 commandments. It's not a commandment on its own. You won't find it counted in the numbers of the commandments. It's a description of the responsibility that we have for one another. Well, where does that come from? It's derived from a verse, and the verse is a verse which describes punishment. The verse is describing when we fail to live up to the Torah, there will be enemies attacking us, and we will flee from the attack of our enemies. And the verse says, "V'koshlu ish b'achiv." Each one will trip over his brother. How does that happen? I suppose if Reuven falls down and he's on the ground, Shimon running along could trip over him. But could you have a situation where Reuven trips over Shimon and Shimon trips over Reuven? I mean, it could happen an hour later, but in the meantime, the one on the ground trips the one who's running, not the other way around. So does it mean each one trips up the other one? So here, the Gemara says, when one Jew has a responsibility and another Jew doesn't take account of that responsibility, he's then tripped up by the responsibility of his friend. Particularly, the Gemara there is talking about someone who's tempted to do a transgression, and someone else could prevent him, could convince him to stop or prevent him in other ways, and doesn't. Then not only the criminal who performs the transgression is going to be penalized, but the one who could have stopped him and didn't also is going to be penalized. He's tripped up by the failure of his friend because he has a responsibility for him. That's where it's derived from. That's not a mitzvah. That's a statement of of punishment for failure. It's a statement of liability when someone fails and somebody else has punished for his failure. Where's the mitzvah? Where does it say you have to do this? I think the right answer is that it's built into every mitzvah. That every mitzvah is built in a social way. So this idea that we are responsible for one another comes from our legal identity. Our legal identity as people who are part of a larger national entity, and they have a responsibility to the people, the members of the nation. I'll give you one final illustration of this. Let's imagine you have an orchestra, and they're playing a concert, and there are critics in the audience who are evaluating the concert and are deciding on next year's international tour on the basis of how good the concert is. The last chord is a C major chord, C-E-G. C-E-G. And everyone plays the chord, and the chord is bright and beautiful sounding, except for one player of the oboe. Oboe is a very sharp, piercing sound, and he plays E flat, making it into a minor chord instead of a major chord. That's going to sound terrible. Let's say they lose the international tour. They go to this oboe player and say, "You're crazy. You ruined everything. Why did you do that?" He says, "Listen, there are 80 people in the orchestra. Each one has a note to play. You're right. I played the wrong note. That's what I did. My problem. I made a mistake. You want to fire me? Fire me." No, dope. It's not just that you played the wrong note. You cost the orchestra its whole tour. You're not living as an individual. Your actions don't count as individual only. They count also in the context, their interactions with other people. When there's a group that's trying to accomplish something, and it needs the cooperation of everyone, and one person doesn't cooperate, and therefore the group project fails, that means the project of 80 people failed. Not just that you failed, it's your responsibility. So that's the idea of group responsibility. That's where the responsibility comes for other people. And that's why his inability to fulfill his commandment doesn't mean that the responsibility lapses. Because for me, I have a responsibility for his responsibility. Were it the fact that because he can't do it, there's no responsibility left, then I wouldn't be connected to him at all. There'd be no reason for me to help him do what he needs to do, because he doesn't need to do anything. He's perfectly good. He's perfectly without any lack. And that's simply not true. So I think that's the conception we have to live with. We have to get used to, that the responsibility is to be fulfilling all of the requirements of the Torah, and we can plead that it was impossible when someone comes to penalize us. But that doesn't mean that we should feel that everything's fine and without blemish if we don't actually fulfill all the responsibilities of the Torah. That's the deal. Questions? No? All clear? Good. Okay, you can push the red button. That'll turn it off.